Have you ever thought, is this just me when struggling to stay organized, start tasks, or manage time? For those of us over 50, these challenges might not be just aging. They could be ADHD hiding in plain sight for decades. I'm Jamie Shapiro, host of Grandma Has ADHD, and I'm building a community where your experiences matter. Whether you're diagnosed, questioning, or simply curious, you're not alone. Our Facebook group is filled with vibrant, understanding people over 50 who share their stories, strategies, and yes, even their struggles, with plenty of laughter along the way. Ready to find your people? Join our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone, because ADHD doesn't have an age limit and neither does understanding yourself better. Together, we're changing the conversation about ADHD after 50. Come be part of the story. Hi, I am pleased and excited to welcome back to our show Judith Rosen. She is a licensed clinical social worker that I met at the International ADHD Conference. And I'm going to read her bio again, but I hope that you will go back and listen to the first interview where we go more into Judith's backstory. She was diagnosed with ADHD when she was 36 years old after a successful career in new media. She returned to school and got her bachelor's in psychology from Hunter College at age 51 and a master's in social work from NYU at age 53. She believes being diagnosed and treated for ADHD was key to her career and academic success in her 40s and 50s. And we got into a conversation that we were really not able to cover with the adequate time that this conversation needed. And it is one that is near and dear to my heart and probably anybody who has ADHD, not to mention anybody who doesn't have ADHD. It's a pretty big one these days, and that is anxiety. So, Judith, I cannot wait to hear what you have to say. The only thing that I will say coming into the conversation is the one thing that I've learned about anxiety. I've learned that depression is when we dwell on the past, and anxiety is when we ruminate about the future. So with that, I'm going to let you take the microphone, Judith.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much, Jamie, for having me back. It was so much fun last time, so I'm excited to be here again today and to talk a little bit about anxiety and ADHD, because it's interesting because a lot of the symptoms can overlap between anxiety and ADHD, but there's also a real relationship with the kind of anxiety that you might develop after having ADHD, especially untreated over the years. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So there are people with ADHD that do have a comorbid anxiety diagnosis as well. And, it's important that people work with their provider, particularly whoever's their prescriber of medication, to really make sure that they're getting the correct diagnosis, because they might need a different kind of medication to address anxiety itself. If they have maybe a panic disorder or a generalized anxiety disorder, kind of separate from the ADHD, they might be treated with different types of medications than they would otherwise.
So I'm going to cut you off right there, Judith, because we are really making the focus of the conversation. Since it is geared to people over the age of 50, we're really not addressing medication. We're trying to take the route of pills don't teach skills. Not that I am not an advocate for medication, but because a lot of people in our audience may have polypharmacy where they cannot take additional medications.
Exactly.
I really want to steer away from any conversation around. I want to really address anxiety. Okay. And you said that they can co-occur. And again, I'm not a social worker. I am, becoming an ADHD coach. But what I have heard consistently is that social anxiety is the number one coexisting condition with people with ADHD. And I would say that anxiety falls under that umbrella as well. However, that anxiety shows up. So I hope we can talk a little bit about social anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was just underscoring, make sure you're getting the right diagnosis. Just that's across the board for everybody. But yeah, absolutely, because it kind of affects people. ADHD affects people in terms of anxiety in two different ways. One way is, there is a component of difficulty regulating your emotions when you have ADHD, and like the impulsivity aspect of ADHD, how you react to things. And so when you're under stress, you might become more anxious about a stressful situation than somebody without ADHD would. Stress it. Yeah.
I have a great example. I have a great example of impulsivity. For me, I had a business arrangement with somebody, and the arrangement that we made was different than what he had sent me. And I immediately flooded with emotion, and I wanted to send off the email because I don't like sitting with that anxious feeling where my boyfriend is like, no, you need to be calm. You need to just sit back. You don't need to react. Like, for me, just to have it sit in my body is the most uncomfortable feeling. So I think that's a good example of impulsivity, correct? But I would love to hear some other examples of how we regulate emotion or emotional dysregulation, because this is one that I haven't really explored as much as I would like to.
Well, it can be very much one of the things that you hear a lot is for children and adults is interrupting a conversation and blurting things out. And I don't know if it's happened to you. It's happened to me.
I never do that, Judith.
And so you might, some stressful thing might happen. Like, let me think if I can come up with an example. So it happened to me. It's just something dumb, just getting a correct certificate of insurance for a contractor in my building, and they make it really hard to do. And I did kind of react to that because, like, oh my God, what if I don't get it? Because if I don't get it, we can't work out on Sundays because he's got to have a certificate. We can't use the gym. And all of a sudden my head went this way, and I became upset by that. And I started to call, and I almost yelled at my trainer. And he's a lot bigger than me, so that could have been dangerous. But, I had to pull it in and say, okay, it's going to be okay. We're going to get it done.
Catastrophizing. It's like we start going to, right.
Yes, it's catastrophizing. That's what's happening internally in terms of the thought process. And that's where cognitive behavior therapy is useful to disrupt it, to break that cycle. But we're more likely to express what we're feeling inside. Just the way you said you needed to send that email, we're more likely to snap at somebody, at a loved one, not meaning to, but because of that kind of impulsivity, and because
So I have two things to say, because here I am interrupting. A lot of times somebody with ADHD interrupts not to be rude, but and I know this happens to me all the time. It's like, if I don't say this, I'm going to forget to say it. So I get really concerned, like, I'm going to forget it. And then I'm also really excited. And so I didn't know that was considered emotional dysregulation.
It's not. No, that's not.
Okay, because that's where I am. I mean, that when I was, getting ready to fire off the email, I know that was impulsivity and that was impulse regulation, as was your doom spiral, about your gym. Can you give us a little bit more information about CBT? Because I hear it all the time, but I don't think that I don't know how many of our listeners know what that is. And I think it would be super helpful to maybe hear about a patient that you use CBT with and what that looked like.
Well, that would be most of my patients as well as myself. So I am.
An example. Do you want to take me through an example so we can show everybody?
Absolutely. So I just want to preface this by saying I am a Beck Institute certified cognitive behavior therapy clinician. So it's a mouthful. There's an acronym for it, but I've been trained at the Beck Institute in cognitive behavior therapy, and Aaron Beck is kind of the father of cognitive behavior therapy. So I went to the source for the training.
Great. And is that BCK, just for our listeners?
CK, yes, Beck Institute. They're in Philly. If there's any clinicians out there, that they have wonderful training. Now it's online, on demand, and of course they're excellent live training. So it's a great training to get. So it's basically the idea that it's not what happens to us that causes our distress. It's how we think about what's happening to us. It's the automatic thoughts that pop into our head after something happens, right? Some kind of triggering situation. And the triggering situation could even be like a memory that pops in your head. Doesn't have to be something that's actually happening to you right now, but it's how you're evaluating it that then in turn causes you more distress. So the example that I gave with the insurance certificate, my initial thought was, oh my God, if this isn't done right, I'm not going to be able to bring the trainer to the gym on Sunday for our session. I might get in trouble for that if I try to. And just like all this stuff, my thought
Mm-hmm.
process,
Mm-hmm.
right, went down
Mm-hmm.
this road. And what CBT does is it gives you the skills to break that thought process, which is what I ended up doing, which is like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? You don't get it today. And if you don't get it today, you'll work on it and you'll get it next week and you'll do a virtual session,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you start to ask yourself certain questions when you catch yourself going off like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the anxiety spiral that you
Mm-hmm.
might or might not be
Or the doom
familiar with.
spiral. The doom spiral, as we
The
like to
doom
call it.
spiral, exactly. I teach my clients, a series of questions they can ask themselves that can then help them come up with a more adaptive and helpful way of thinking.
Okay.
And especially if it comes up, I have a great example if you want one.
Sure. I had that, or I was going to say I can share one that came up for me today, and I don't know if
Oh,
it's too big
please.
to go into.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
But it's a vulnerable share for you.
Okay.
So one of the things that I have to do, so my predominant business is Silver Linings Transitions, and we do move management and home organizing in the San Diego area. And that means that I have to go out and network and market the company. And to be honest with you, I avoid it as much as I can because I get really uncomfortable, especially when my competitors are there. And, I feel like if they don't pick our company, then it's a reflection of me. So today, there's a community that I've done a lot of presentations for, and they had a change in salespeople who would normally book us. But I had been trying to get a presentation booked. And I found out today that they have booked their calendar, even though I've been reaching out to someone that I've known who took the place, that I found out that they had scheduled another company and did not give us an opportunity. So I immediately was like, they don't like me. What did I do wrong? That's immediately. So I don't know if that's one you want to go with, or you think there might be one that's more
Yeah,
applicable
that's
to
a
the
good one.
audience.
You're
Okay.
using a way of thinking, it's unhelpful way of thinking, which we categorize as jumping to conclusions.
I do that all the time.
And that's
I've got two
mind
broken
reading.
legs.
I know it's mind reading or predicting something bad is going to happen. That's the catastrophizing you were talking about earlier. So yeah, tell me more about that then.
Oh, just, yeah, again, like I one of the things I feel that I do really well is presenting to our audience about the process of decluttering and downsizing or right sizing so that they can move into communities. So when I get that opportunity to present, it opens more doors. People hear me speak, and then it gives more business to our company. And that is for me, I'm very comfortable presenting because I think I'm hysterical, but I'm knowledgeable. And so not getting that opportunity, and this is a community that we work in on a regular basis, means that the likelihood is that their clients are going to hear somebody else speak. We're not going to get business, and that we have been getting. So that's one doom is, we're not going to get business from that community. But then I also go into, that's the thing that I do really well. If they're not booking me and they're booking somebody else, what's wrong with me? So
Right.
did I explain it?
Right. So how true is it that means there's something wrong with you? That's something you could ask yourself. Is there another explanation? Is it that they may want to go with somebody who's lower price, or there might be a style difference? There's a lot of different reasons why your firm might not be chosen. And so, with CBT, you can examine that and you can be more realistic with yourself about whatever the problem
I
is.
think we should avoid this one because I'm even feeling uncomfortable as I'm talking about it. So
yeah, I don't want this to be a therapy session.
I'm right. I'm emotionally charged. So why don't you give especially as it relates to maybe an issue that a senior might be facing, a neurodivergent senior.
Oh, yeah. I had one happen to me the other day because, even though I am treated for ADHD and I myself treat ADHD, that doesn't mean that I don't sometimes end up in situations that are caused by having ADHD. And one of the things that's hardest for people who have ADHD, that is what contributes to the anxiety, especially if it's untreated ADHD, is that, over the years, a lot of things haven't gone well for you. And especially, again, if it's untreated, maybe, you've had trouble on the job, you've had trouble in relationships, right? It's affected family relationships. And then when you come up with a task that you have to do, or a party you have to plan, or whatever it is, then the catastrophizing that we talked about before is just sky high. It's like, and you feel this horrible overwhelm. Like, how am I going to do this? Because I've always failed in the past. And then you start having these thoughts, right? And having these beliefs about yourself, other people of the world that come up. I'm a failure. I can't do anything right. If you've been told your whole life that you're sloppy and messy, it's going to be hard for you to not believe you are, And so I forgot a birthday the other day of a loved one that's very close to me. And it was more that I forgot what day it was than I forgot it was their birthday, right? Because, ADHD and time blindness, you can, right? And, but the anxiety was, what am I going to say to her? How am I going to tell her? How's she going to react? She's probably going to be mad. She's probably thinking, and this is the mind reading we just talked about. She's probably thinking, oh, there's Judy goes again. She's, always forgetful, doesn't care enough, all those things that maybe have happened to us many times. So especially for those of us who are older, we've got decades of this possibly, and with CBT, one of the good questions I really love that we train people to ask themselves is, okay, what can I do about this problem? Is there anything I can do about this thing I'm worried about right now? And, because a little bit of anxiety is supposed to spur you, right, to solve a problem. That's why we have it in the first place, right, as human beings. And I thought, you know what? Worrying about it isn't going to change the outcome. The sooner I call her, the better it's going to be. And
okay. So you called your friend and how did that conversation go?
Yeah. So after all that worrying, I called her and she's like, oh yeah, okay, no, it's no big deal. Yeah. We're going to get together next weekend. We already have a plan and we'll celebrate my birthday then. So it's cool. So she was like, didn't matter at all. But here I was, I don't know if it was that long I was upset, but maybe a couple of hours after I realized I missed it. It was the day before. I put myself through needless anxiety. And again, that's something that we do in CBT is we teach these different skills for different situations where you can look at the thinking that's distressing you and come up with a better way of thinking or more helpful way of thinking.
So for those people who've never heard CBT before, can you just kind of give a good overview of it? Just because I want to make sure, because I'm still a little bit unclear.
Okay. So the idea is that our thoughts contribute to our emotions. And when something happens to us, usually a thought just pops in our head of some kind, right? Like you could be driving, right? And somebody cuts you off. And the first thought is probably something a bad word I don't want to use on a podcast, right? Right, a blankety blank, and your heart's just beating faster and you start having an emotional reaction to it, especially those of us with ADHD. That's that impulsivity, that emotional regulation. We don't want it to escalate, and it can escalate into road rage or whatever, right? But you could question that thought because the thought really isn't being cut off because you're not going to be that much later that you got cut off. They didn't hit your car. Nothing bad really happened, but you're offended and angry that somebody had the gall to cut you off, right? And
That's true.
so when you get to that point, then you can ask yourself, well, is there another reason? Maybe that person is in a hurry. Maybe they're late for work. Maybe their kid is sick. Maybe, their wife is having a baby at a hospital. I really don't know why they cut me off. It might have not been because, they thought they were better and stronger than me. And that kind of reaction then can bring down the emotional high that you're at, anger that you're at, bring that emotion down and help you function more adaptively in the world. And that's just a very concrete example, but I thought it might make more sense.
Sure.
And so, right? And what's great about CBT treatment is it is a structured treatment and we do teach skills and we get work with the client so that they're able to then start using their skills, so that when they come into a session, we can kick off the session with, okay, let's talk about the week. Are there any problems you want my help solving? And to kind of coach them to eventually be their own therapist. So
Great.
that's that in a nutshell. Very tiny nutshell is what CBT is. There's other aspects of it, like exposure therapy and other techniques that are part of it. But the idea, really, the core of it is understanding that you can have two people in the exact same situation and the exact same thing happens to both of them. They will each have a completely different reaction depending about how they perceive what's happening to them, based on how they see themselves usually.
Right. Yeah, that's super helpful. Okay, we're going to take a pause and hear a word from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back, and I want to talk about anything else that you want to share, but also make sure that anybody who wants to work with you can find you, and what a session might look like and how long somebody might want to see you or another therapist and what that might look like. So you did sort of mention that we know what's bothering you today. So we're going to take a pause, come back, and so here we go. Ever wondered why helping a loved one declutter feels like speaking different languages? I did, especially with my mom. It wasn't until I founded Silver Linings Transitions, helping San Diego seniors organize and move for over a decade, that I discovered why. We all experience clutter differently, and for those of us with ADHD, it's a whole other world. If you are listening in the San Diego area and feeling stuck with moving, paperwork, photos, or home organization, our team at Silver Linings Transitions gets it. We understand ADHD's unique challenges, and we won't just help you get organized. We'll create sustainable systems that finally stick. Schedule a consultation with our team today at 760-522-1624. That's 760-522-1624, or find us at silverliningstransitions.com. One of the reasons that I really love pausing an interview is to talk to our guest about, how they want the interview to go and how things are going. And Judith just shared really good insight. So I know that I had asked one question, which was, how can people find you? But I loved the idea of the obtrusive thoughts that somebody with ADHD might have. So I'd love to hear what you had to say.
Okay. Oh, sure. And it's the automatic thoughts that come up. It's not always that they're intrusive and they're constant. Okay. It's more OCD. But yeah. So again, it's something that builds up very often for us over time, particularly for those of us that weren't treated until later in life. And you might have, because of your experiences, develop beliefs about yourself, such as I'm unlovable or I'm unlikable, because maybe you had trouble in relationships or trouble with making friends because of your ADHD symptoms.
Well, I was going to say, if you heard so much negative constantly, you were constantly in trouble or constantly blurring things out or constantly talking. It's no wonder that ADHD children have that negative voice in their head. So,
absolutely. And, or you might believe you have beliefs that fall under the I'm incompetent kind of, I can't do anything right. I'm a failure. I will never succeed. And if you have those basic beliefs about yourself, then your automatic thoughts are going to reflect that. So if you have two different people go out on a date and the guy doesn't call them the next day, right? And one of them's just like, doesn't, they're okay and they don't have any bad beliefs about themselves. They're like, oh, I guess he's not that interested. Next, they're swiping, they're done. But somebody who has this belief, I'm unlovable, they're going to read that as, oh, he obviously didn't like me. And if he doesn't like me, that's happened before. That probably means nobody likes me. That probably means nobody is ever going to like me. So I might as well sign off this, this app and, just devote my time just to myself and just stay at home and never go out. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because if they're isolated, they're never going to meet anybody, and their belief about themselves comes true. And so after we work on kind of the thoughts that keep popping up and we find what's underneath that, then we work on changing the belief. Not, I am lovable to some people, not to everybody, but my person probably is out there. I'm going to keep trying, and I'm going to work on improving myself in other ways. That might be your new belief about yourself rather than this blanket, I'm unlovable. The I'm a failure thing comes up a lot. Like you get overwhelmed. My overwhelm, if I may, comes when I plan a party. And I love to plan parties, and I like to do my birthday myself because I'm that diva. It's like, I want it to be the food I like, where I like, people I like.
And you're
I
not
don't like
disappointed. I'm right
and
there
I'm
with
not.
you.
Yeah,
I
and
want what I
and I'll pay for it. I'm not asking people
right.
to pay for my whims, but
Do you worry that no one's going to show up? Let me ask
I
you
worry,
that.
oh, it's going to show up. The food's going to be terrible. Everyone's going to hate it. This is going to go wrong. That's going to go
Okay.
wrong. That's going to wrong.
Okay.
And I realized one day, after
Uh-huh.
being a therapist and doing this work, I was like, it always, it never, it's never gone wrong. It's
Mm-hmm.
always gone well. You've
Well,
always had a good time. The people that should have always had a good time. So now, like this, the more recent years, let's say the last couple of years after COVID, where there were no parties,
mhm.
I started saying exactly that to myself during the week. It's going to be great because it's always great. And just that coping statement, when I started to
Mhm.
go down that road, it's
Mhm.
going to be great because it always is great. It's not perfect because nothing is, but people have a good time and so will you. And
I
boy,
think
that helps so much.
it would be hard though to go from, and you're a therapist, so just say to myself, "Oh, it's going to be great." Like that just seems to me like sugarcoating it. Do
Oh,
you I don't know, do you have advice for people who maybe aren't as evolved
well,
as you? And
notice that I gave evidence. It's
Mhm.
always turned out fine. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but people enjoyed themselves and you enjoyed themselves.
Mhm. Okay.
So it's not negative versus positive. It's realistic versus
Okay.
unrealistic.
Do you think that
Because thinking, oh, it's going to be a disaster, it's never been a disaster, ever.
right. I would
And
imagine a
oh,
lot.
I left something out. Yeah. Right. What I was going to say was that it's not negative versus positive. It is very much about being realistic about it and going from unrealistic to realistic. And I forgot the very important point that I forgot was that we tend to overestimate when we catastrophize, overestimate how bad something's going to be. But this is the key. We underestimate our ability to handle it if it is that bad. And that's the key. And that's what makes it very different from negative versus positive. And I have said that to myself, like I'm comfortable with it always works out. It's going to work out this time too. That's enough for me with this particular situation. But in other situations, I'll say, you know what? Even if nobody shows up, I'll figure out what went wrong and do something different next year. And I'll eat all the pizza and store all the pizza or give the pizza away. Like I'll have like a plan B or C in my head. And I remind myself that, it's not going to kill me. Nobody's going to die if nobody shows up
Mhm.
for your party. It's
Mhm.
not the end of the world. And so it can be really helpful to actually consider the worst case scenario,
Mhm.
right? Which in a party is
Mhm.
nobody shows up, right? And
Mhm.
then say, what'll happen? Well, I'll be really upset and I'll be disappointed. Okay. Well, how will it be the next day? I'll probably still hurt a little. And the next day and the next week and the next week. And then you realize that you'll get over it.
Right. I have something
So
to share. First of
please.
all, and I think the problem is that we're interrupting. And so I don't think that StreamYard was made for two people with ADHD. But one of the things that I love about the fact that we do have the challenges that we have with ADHD is that the majority of us are very resilient. And so we're like Teflon, we bounce back. So yeah, okay, this is going to stink, but you're right. I can handle this. And I also love the MacGyver aspect of, just being able to, okay, well, no one came for the pizza, so I'll give the pizza away. I'll store the pizza. I'll eat the pizza, right? So I love
Mm-hmm.
that. And I want to share with you. So when I was starting my business and going through a divorce simultaneously, I happened to read a book. I don't remember the title, but it was about uncertainty because Nobody is comfortable in uncertainty. And I remember they shared the story of J.K. Rowling, who I don't know if you know, she's the writer of the Harry Potter series. And she actually wrote that series in a coffee shop and lived in her car. So she says, when you are at zero, you can only go up. And so when I was going through all of that, I thought to myself, okay, what does zero look like? What is like worst case scenario? In my situation, okay, well, I get a job at Starbucks because again, I'm starting a company. I get a job at Starbucks, they'll hire me. I can go move in with my former mother-in-law, and I had to have that plan B, that ground zero, so that I could then be okay. So I love that that's a part of it. So what are some other tips that go ahead.
Yeah. Well, based on what you just said, it's important. I wanted to point out that that's one of the ways I think Beck defined anxiety as difficulty tolerating uncertainty. That's the not knowing. People with anxiety talk about that all the time is, I just want to know, and that not knowing keeps you in a very, it's just,
I hate it.
Yeah. And so it's learning to be able to sit with the not knowing and asking yourself, is there anything I could do about this right now? And if the answer is no, worrying about it doesn't do anything other than, basically upset you, right?
Worry robs tomorrow or steals tomorrow of its sorrows.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that I do is I have and I'm sure other people use this technique, and it's kind of like the down arrow technique in a way, but and then what is one of my favorite questions. So when people are thinking he's going to break up with me, or I'm going to lose my job, whatever it is, and they're like, and they're thinking about it, but nothing can change. Their worry doesn't help it. I'll say, okay, let's say you lose your job. Then what? Well, I'll be really upset and angry. And then what? And then what? And then what? And they'll go through the whole litany of, I'll lose my house, I'll end up, homeless, I'll have to sleep on my friend's couch. And then we get to the point where, and then, I'll save up some money and I'll work in a certain kind of job, or I'll borrow money from so-and-so, I'll get back on my feet and I'll do this and I'll do that. Then they got a job, Now that doesn't always work for everybody. And I recognize that there are issues out there for people. But my point is, usually when we're in that state of anxiety, we don't see beyond the next step. We're just visualizing that bad thing that's going to happen. We don't see the resilience that you were talking about earlier.
I'm kind of blown away because of the whole you saying something about we don't tolerate uncertainty. We don't like it. And I thought everybody hated uncertainty.
To a certain extent, but it doesn't necessarily, I think there are people that don't have anxiety, it'll be annoying, but people with anxiety, it's upsetting. You feel it physically, you feel it in your body, and you can't sleep and you can't eat and you're pacing, and it's all you can think about. And, if you have ADHD and it's related to something that over and over again in your life has gone wrong, right? You can see why it's even more triggering, if you will, to your anxiety symptoms. Yeah.
So what else do you feel like we need to say? And as I've shared in a lot of these interviews, we'll get off the phone or we'll get off the call and be like, I should have said this. Is there, and again, I want to make sure that the two of us, like how many people with ADHD does it take to change a light bulb? But I also let you remind people how they can get in touch with you and who you work with. And, because I know with therapy, there's some issues with crossing, state lines and all of that stuff. So
to me, the most important thing that people should know about anxiety is it's a lot more common than you think. And it's not a personality trait. It's actually a thing that you can treat. That's if you have one of the anxiety disorders, as well as treating the anxiety that can accompany ADHD for the reasons we talked about before. Like CBT can be applied in both cases. We won't talk about medication, but there's differences in how that would be applied accordingly. But to understand that it is a thing and that thing can be treated. And full disclosure, I didn't know I had anxiety until I was in a class on how to treat anxiety. And we were doing like the checking off the symptoms for when we evaluate. I'm like, wait a second, I have all that. You mean I'm not just like a nervous person? I just was high strung is what they would call me as a kid, And
so what are the symptoms? What are the
Um,
symptoms of anxiety? And also,
I
let's make sure that we define CBT, because we've been using CBT. I believe it's cognitive behavioral therapy, but
it's cognitive behavior therapy is CBT.
okay.
And the anxiety encompasses, it's like an umbrella for several different kinds of disorders, but generally you'll feel the anxiety in your body. You'll have excessive worry that you can't stop. You'll have difficulty sleeping. You'll have a certain kind of restlessness. You'll have this kind of sense of impending doom that's coming. That would be more like would fall under the general anxiety disorder. But whatever happens to you tends to trigger your sympathetic nervous system. And so you will feel physical symptoms from it,
Mhm,
right? Heart
mhm.
racing, difficulty, slowing down your breath and things like that, or, tummy problems come out in anxiety. But it's, characterized mainly by the excessive worry more
Sure.
than anything else. Yeah. And
Mhm.
and you should see if you're concerned, there's some self-tests online, of course, but you should see a clinician and ask about it. What I want to do is make sure that people realize that it's a lot more common than we give it credit for. And
Especially these days, our children have a lot more anxiety, and that's a whole other can of worms.
that's a whole other can of worms, but that people realize that it is a thing, it is real, and more importantly, because of that, it can be treated. You don't have to sit with it, because I have people telling me about like phobias they've had their whole life, or how I can't get on a plane. I'm always worried all week. I have this horrible travel anxiety before I travel. And all of that can be treated. You don't have to suffer with it.
I would love to talk a little bit about exposure therapy when it comes to flying, just because we didn't really cover that. I'd like to go a little long if we can, just
Mhm.
because I think that would be super helpful. But also, it's really important to treat anxiety because, as you mentioned, it can disrupt our sleep. And we are finding out that sleep is one of the most important things we can do for our brains, whether we are neurotypical or neurodivergent. As we age, not even, yeah, we're all aging, but having proper sleep. So if your sleep is disrupted, that is enough reason, I think, to seek out help or therapy. But let's talk a little bit about exposure therapy before we get off, because that I know a lot of people have phobias, and I know a little bit about it, but I am not the professional, so I will let you talk about it.
Can I talk about mine?
Sure.
Okay, so in the training, they said, do exposure therapy on yourself so that you
Okay.
can feel what your client is going to go through. So I'm going to make this as quick as I can. I was terrified of squirrels since I was a little girl because a playmate in my neighborhood got bitten by a squirrel and had to get
Oh,
those awful rabies shots.
oh,
So my whole life, since I was 5 years old, I thought that squirrels attack you and bite you because that's what
oh,
happened to this kid.
that's
And
scary.
so it is scary. And so I lived in Forest Hills at the time. And so if there were squirrels, like they run up and down the street, it's a lot of trees, right? Forest Hills. And I would cross
Hmm.
the street. If there were squirrels in front of my building, I would cross the street and wait until they moved away before I would actually go in my building. That bad.
Hmm.
Even though I
Hmm.
logically. But
Right.
with exposure therapy, they have you first learn everything about the thing you're afraid of. And one of the things I
Hmm.
learned is squirrels rarely actually carry rabies these days. Number one, I
Hmm.
learned that they don't attack people. The reason they run towards you is because they think you've got food because they're habituated to human. So just the
Hmm.
education piece lowered my fear right to begin with.
Hmm.
Then after
Hmm.
that, I would make myself look at drawings of squirrels, cartoon squirrels, then photos of squirrels, videos, movement, cartoons of squirrels, videos of squirrels, and I would watch them. And
Hmm.
then, and this is the key with exposure therapy, you want to gradually let the client identify least scary to most scary situation and gradually get into each situation, tolerate it for as long as you can, and then a little bit longer, right? And
Hmm.
then stop. And you do that in a sequence. So eventually I did that, not crossing the street for the first minute after I saw a squirrel to
Mhm.
5 minutes and then one day and then it's gonna blow your mind when I tell you how long this took. And one day I'm just walking up the street and I looked and I was like, oh, that squirrel's so cute. And I walked and went, what did I just say? And I was
Ah,
not afraid. I think that took me tops 6 weeks.
wow. That's
And
pretty good.
I've had clients with crazy phobias of all sorts of things, and 6 to 9 sessions. They don't believe it when I tell them, no, it's really, and it works. It's pretty incredible. So
That is
that's in a nutshell, exposure therapy.
that's so perfect. Did you get the connection, the nutshell with the squirrels?
The nutshells, yeah. And I don't even work. And then I realized that my little friend, my little playmate, he probably was trying to feed a squirrel and the squirrel bit him. That's probably what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because that makes so
Wow.
much more sense,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
know? But the key here that I want people to understand is exposure therapy is not that they're going to make you go into the scary situation and lock the door like on Fear Factor. It's gradual and you're in control, and it's step by step, a little more, a little more, a little more. It's gradual exposure therapy. I'm
Yeah.
very passionate about it, as you can see.
Yeah. So my mom did that with lizards, actually. I grew up in Florida, and to this day, I don't think she does well with lizards, but she also had exposure therapy. Okay, so how can people find you? And do you have any parting words for, so that you feel good about the way we're complete and whole?
Okay. So they can go to my website, which is JudithERosen.com, or they can find me also on Psychology Today. And I am licensed in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And so I can see you if you're in any of those 3 states. In addition to the cognitive behavioral therapy I do mainly for anxiety and ADHD, I do also do bereavement therapy specifically for animals. I'm trained as a veterinary social worker. So I do pet bereavement work, which is something I'm also very passionate about. And also working with people in the LGBTQ community, especially these days, and people in the creative arts as well.
I love it.
So,
I love it.
But what do I want people in conclusion? If any of this feels familiar to you or sounds familiar to you, if you've got anxiety, if you think you might have anxiety, if you think you might have ADHD and some anxiety around that and symptoms with that, get help. It's out there. The help is out there. You can start by talking to your doctor and getting a referral from them, or, looking if you have a county mental health number that you can call. But all of this stuff is treatable, and there's no reason to suffer. That's my main message, I think.
I appreciate that. And one of the things, that I am finding in my work with, people, I would say boomers and the silent generation, is that they are so reluctant to get help because they didn't grow up in a time where it was a weakness if you needed help. And I remember even growing up and needing to go to the therapist. And I felt, so embarrassed that I had to walk into the therapist office and somebody was going to see me. And I'm born in 1970, so I'm sure older generations even have more. So I want to back up what Judith said, which is you do not have to suffer. You do not have to. There is nothing wrong with needing help. And I actually find that my best relationships are with people who are vulnerable and let me see their underbellies, because then I feel comfortable being myself. And that's where we really have authentic connections and relationships. So I love talking to Judith. I can't wait to see you again at the International ADHD Conference. Yes. I'll probably have you back. So if you can come up with any other topics. Thank you all for listening to the podcast today. If you liked it, please like and subscribe and share it. We are a growing movement as people are discovering that ADHD does not go away with age. And you can find us in our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Because one thing I know for sure is that anything that we have to face is always better when we go at it with other people. So I am working as much as I can to help make the rest of your life the best of your life. Thank you so much, Judith, for joining me again.
Thank you for having me.
The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, Call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.